In the shadows of the Persian Empire, where power was absolute and a single command could mean life or death, rose a young woman history almost forgot. She was not born a queen, not even born of royal blood, but an orphan, hidden in obscurity, raised in silence. Yet in her veins burned a courage that would one day confront kings, silence conspiracies, and save an entire nation from annihilation. This is the story of Esther, a tale of beauty and betrayal, of banquets and bloodlines, of a crown placed on the head of a girl chosen by destiny to stand in the gap. And when the world demanded her silence, she answered with a voice that changed history forever. Long before Esther wore a crown, she wore the burden of loss. Born into exile, far from the homeland of her ancestors, she was just another Jewish girl living under the shadow of the mighty Persian Empire. Her parents are never named in scripture because their story ended before hers could even begin. Esther, originally named Hadassah, meaning myrtle, was left without father or mother. In a world where women had little power, she began life with even less. She was an orphan, dependent on the mercy of others to survive. But God was already writing a hidden script. In the city of Susa lived her cousin, Mordecai, a man from the tribe of Benjamin, who had been carried into exile generations earlier. He took her in as his own daughter, raising her not with wealth or royal privilege, but with faith, discipline, and wisdom. To everyone else, she was just another girl among the exiled Jews. Yet to heaven, she was chosen for a destiny even kings could not escape. The book of Esther introduces her story with quiet simplicity, almost as if hiding her true significance until the right moment. But beneath the silence of her childhood, the pieces of God's plan were falling into place. A girl without parents, raised in obscurity, would soon be thrust into the palace of the most powerful man on earth. Her beginning was not glorious, but it was intentional. What the world saw as weakness, her orphanhood, was the very soil where God planted the seeds of deliverance. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are born from the most broken beginnings. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Psalm 27:10. The story of Esther takes a dramatic turn as the Persian Empire searches for a new queen. After Queen Vashti refuses King Xerxes' command, she is stripped of her crown. A vast kingdom spanning 127 provinces suddenly has a throne without a queen. From every corner of the empire, young women are gathered and brought into the citadel of Susa. Among them is Hadassah, the orphan girl raised by her cousin Mordecai. But here, in this foreign land, she is given another name, Esther. The palace is a world of gold, marble, and endless luxury, yet also a place of competition, envy, and hidden agendas. Each young woman is prepared for a year with perfumes, oils, and fine garments before being presented to the king. Yet while others rely on appearance and charm, Esther stands out for something far deeper: her grace, humility, and inner strength. When the moment comes, King Xerxes is captivated. Out of countless candidates, he places the royal crown on Esther's head, making her Queen of Persia. An orphaned Jewish girl, once unknown, now sits in the highest seat of power, beside the most powerful man of her time. But Esther's rise is not just a tale of beauty or fortune. Behind the scenes, God's providence is at work. He is positioning her for a mission far greater than she could imagine: the deliverance of her people. As Proverbs 21:1 reminds us, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord like the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wishes. Esther may have worn the crown, but it was God who guided the throne. The stage is now set. Esther is queen, but her true test is yet to come. After Vashti's downfall, the royal decree spread across the empire. A new queen was to be chosen. Young women from every province were brought into the citadel of Susa, each prepared with months of beauty treatments before being presented to the king. Among them was Esther, the humble Jewish orphan who had been raised in silence and faith by her cousin Mordecai. Unlike the others, Esther did not rely on wealth, extravagance, or pride. She carried herself with a quiet grace that drew the attention of everyone who met her. She found favor in the eyes of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the women, who granted her the best accommodations and special care. When her time came to stand before King Xerxes, Esther did not seek to impress with jewels or grandeur. Instead, she chose simplicity, trusting in God's providence. The moment the king laid eyes on her, his heart was captured. In a single decision, Esther was crowned Queen of Persia, clothed in royal robes and given the crown once worn by Vashti. Yet this was not merely a story of beauty or chance, it was the unfolding of divine purpose. Esther's rise was no accident. God was positioning her in the very heart of power for a mission that would one day save her people from destruction. In her elevation, we see a reminder that God can lift the humble to places of influence, not for their own glory, but to accomplish His greater plan. As it is written in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever He will." Esther's journey to queenship was not just the fulfillment of a royal decree. It was the hand of God, steering history toward redemption. While Esther was settling into her role as queen, a new figure emerged in the Persian court, Haman, a powerful official who quickly rose to become second in command under King Xerxes. The king elevated him above all the nobles, demanding that everyone bow in his presence as a sign of honor and obedience, and everyone did, except one man. Mordecai, Esther's cousin and guardian, refused to bow. His allegiance belonged to the God of Israel alone. This quiet act of defiance enraged Haman. It wasn't just wounded pride, it was humiliation before the entire empire. Haman's anger burned hotter with each passing day, and when he discovered Mordecai's Jewish identity, his fury widened. Punishing one man was not enough. He sought the destruction of an entire people. Driven by hatred, Haman devised a plan of genocide, casting lots, known as Purim, to determine the day of their annihilation. The decree went out swiftly. From one end of the empire to the other, the Jews were marked for death. The once peaceful lives of God's people were suddenly overshadowed by fear and despair. Mothers wept for their children, families cried out to God, and mourning spread through every province. Meanwhile, Mordecai clothed himself in sackcloth and ashes, standing at the gates of the palace in visible grief. He knew this was no ordinary trial. It was a moment that demanded courage, intercession, and God's intervention. The scriptures remind us, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." 1 Peter 5:8. Just as the enemy prowled in Esther's day through Haman's hatred, so too does evil seek to destroy God's people even now. But God had already placed Esther in the palace. The stage was set for a divine confrontation, one that would test whether she had the courage to rise and act. The decisive moment finally arrived. After days of preparation and prayer, the young queen, draped in royal garments, walked slowly toward the inner court of the palace. The law was clear. No one, not even the queen, could approach the king uninvited. To do so meant death, unless the king extended his golden scepter. The air was heavy with silence. Servants and guards watched with tense eyes as she moved forward. Her heart pounded, but her faith was stronger than her fear. In that moment, her very life hung on the tilt of the king's hand. And then, it happened. The king looked upon her, and, instead of anger, his face softened. The golden scepter was raised, stretching toward Esther. She had found favor in his eyes. With humility and wisdom, she did not rush to reveal Haman's wicked plan immediately. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Esther knew the power of timing, of waiting for the perfect moment when truth would strike like a thunderclap. At the banquet, the king was eager. Twice he asked her, "What is your request, Queen Esther? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be granted to you." But again Esther delayed, inviting them to yet another banquet. She was weaving her plan with care, waiting for the exact time that God's providence would turn the tide. This segment marks a turning point, not only in Esther's story but in the survival of her people. She had stepped out in courage, and God was guiding her steps toward victory. Then the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. Esther 5:2. The decree had gone out. By law, the Jews were marked for annihilation. The date was set, the weapons were ready, and fear weighed heavily on every Jewish home. Yet, behind the palace walls, the tables had already begun to turn. Esther's courage and Mordecai's wisdom were moving in ways only God could orchestrate. When Esther revealed Haman's wicked scheme before King Xerxes, the room fell silent. The king's fury burned, and in poetic justice, Haman was executed on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. But the danger was not yet gone. The royal decree for the Jews' destruction still stood. Persian law could not be reversed. Instead, a new decree was written. The Jews were given the right to defend themselves. Mordecai, now clothed in royal garments of blue and white, carried the king's authority to proclaim hope where there had been despair. On the appointed day, the Jews stood united. What was meant for their destruction became their victory. Their enemies fell, and their people lived. This moment was not merely survival, it was deliverance. It was the unseen hand of God, moving through the courage of a young woman and the loyalty of her cousin. Esther's story reminds us that God does not forget his people, even when his name is not mentioned. As Esther 9:1 declares, "On the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The oppressed became the triumphant. The silenced became the celebrated, and the forgotten became a testimony for all generations." This was not just Esther's victory, it was God's victory, written into history through the faithfulness of ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances. The moment of truth arrives. Haman's plot to destroy the Jews is already sealed with the king's signet ring, and the decree has spread across the provinces. Though Haman has been exposed and executed, the law of the Persians cannot simply be revoked. The shadow of annihilation still hangs heavy. Esther once more steps forward in courage. She falls before King Xerxes, pleading with tears for the lives of her people. The king, moved by her desperation, extends his golden scepter yet again. This time, he grants Esther and Mordecai the authority to write a new decree in the king's name. What follows is nothing short of divine reversal. Instead of being victims, the Jews are empowered to defend themselves against anyone who would rise to harm them. Across the provinces, fear spreads, not of the Jews, but of the God who fights for them. When the appointed day arrives, the Jews stand strong, defeating their enemies and ensuring their survival. The outcome is monumental. A people once doomed to extermination rise victorious, and their enemies are overthrown. What was meant for destruction becomes a story of deliverance. Mordecai is elevated to a position of immense power, second only to the king, and Esther's courage cements her place in history. This triumph is not just political, it is deeply spiritual. It testifies that even in exile, even under foreign rule, God's hand is never absent. The survival of the Jewish people against impossible odds showcases divine providence. The victory gives birth to a new celebration, the Feast of Purim, a yearly reminder that despair can turn to joy, mourning into gladness, and death into life. As the book closes, Esther's legacy shines bright. A young woman who began as an orphaned exile becomes the queen who saved her people. Through courage, wisdom, and faith, her story echoes through time, reminding us that even in silence, God is always at work. Esther 9:1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The story of Esther reminds us that courage can change the course of history, and faith can turn fear into victory. If this journey inspired you, don't let it end here. Be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder that even in silence, God is working. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, just as Esther's did.